Hi, welcome everyone. We've had a wonderful chat on data in iGaming and the amount of data that we process in iGaming. I think that panel was fantastic. One of the topics we've touched on in that panel is the need and necessity for real-time data processing. And we come to customer engagement today, and the competitive nature of our industry simply demands for us to preempt and react on customer behavior movements. Now, we are an e-commerce industry, and as an e-commerce industry, we don't have the customer present. We don't understand, we can't see them in the shop, we can't see their behavior. What we can analyze is their behavior on site. And whereas if we roll some time back, I believe that you could recognize that the way data was captured was simply a customer interacts with the site, we collect that data is stored, aggregated, averaged, we try and manage it however we can, and then some person at some product vertical sitting in some office would use the reporting tools to create some sort of understanding of customer behavior, and then reactively, days later, weeks later, approach and try to manage customer behavior. Today we have the technology that not only allows us to do this, but with the technology growth, we have reached a point where it's quite necessary to have real-time customer engagement. We're looking at even regulatory, from a regulatory perspective, from a responsible gambling perspective. It is now expected for us to have preemptive designs. So on a panel here with me, talking about real-time engagement, talking about customer management and AI aspects to that, I have Gege Gatt, who is the CEO of EBO. I have David Sachs, who is the CEO of Tomobox, and I have Johan Zammit, who is the founder and CEO of Smart Studios. Guys, welcome.
Hi, Igor.
I wanted to open the conversation, actually to roll on the conversation from the previous panel that I've just sat on, which talked about data in iGaming. And I want to open it up. I want to have your take on the data architectures, very specifically. I'll sort of introduce the topic, and I'd like your feedback on the topic at hand. As I've mentioned, data is collated and averaged and aggregated, right, over time. Now, the nature of our customers, and I believe you understand this, all three of you have been integral to the industry. I've known about you for probably more than a decade now. The journey of a customer lasts for months at a time. And the amount of interactions that the customer will perform with an operator is immense. It's staggering. So those data points are averaged, assessed, aggregated, and then we've now reached very recently a stage where those aggregations, those data points, those assertions about customer behavior need to be pulled and reacted on. Now, I have two questions for you. Neither one of the three of you has functioned as an operator, right? Internally. You're all third-party suppliers and help operators move their real-time engagement. Now, in terms of, and specifically I pointed that out because from a perspective of a third-party supplier, in terms of speed of data access, in terms of speed of ability to read and probably educate your customers what is necessary, and then react and allow them to react on the customer behavior, I'd really like your take on what you have seen are good practices in terms of data architecture, of how data is served, stored, and your understanding on the customer's domain knowledge and what it is they should be storing, right? Sorry for a long intro, but I hope it was clear enough. Any one of you can start on the topic that you feel comfortable with. What's your take on this?
Right. Thank you, Igor. I'll kick off with that, right? So first of all, it's really interesting that you speak about the customer journey. I think gone are the days when we could think of the customer journey as being purely linear and single channel. I think we have multi-point journeys in omni-channel environments. And I think it's critical for us vendors to map to this particular customer journey the specific business pain points which we see in the industry, and how a technology can specifically serve against those pain points. Now, your question specifically asked about best practices in data architecture. Igor recently conducted a survey amongst the iGaming industry in Southern Europe. And what we found is that 60% of operators have some type of front-end engagement tools, and around 80% of them have a CRM tool. But the data from these two tool sets is in no way integrated. So not only do you have a disruption in the data management across these different tool sets, but you have the inability to consolidate meaning, right, from this data. And I think this is the key point which we need to make here around best practice, is that it's one thing to collect data, but it requires an entirely different skill set to make that data actionable. Absolutely. And that is, I think, what we need to do today. And in conversational AI, what that means for us is that on an engagement level, we're not simply understanding the content of that which is being said at an engagement front, but also the context of that Absolutely. Information, and making that operational is really the key to success in the general approach towards the architecture of the solution.
Absolutely. David, you have a take on that, Johan?
So yeah, that's very interesting. I'd like to propose a term which I think sits well with what Gege said, is that we're living in the 100 millisecond economy. Because everything Gege just says has to happen within that scale. If it goes a little bit longer, you just lost your player. Absolutely. That's one thing, and I'll try to talk about the architectural implication about that. The other thing is we look at two elements of data: cognitive, which is conversational, chats, emails, is what you think, and numeric, what you do. These are two different unstructured data that we're trying to merge and get insights out of. So that is very, very challenging. And that's just as an opening. As for the architecture, I think we're all into building small microservices that are very, very, very flexible to deploy, to maintain, and to develop. You don't want a big bulky code in any of your services. You're following new practices that have never been used before, like immutable service, a service that can only talk about one thing and output another thing. And the other thing is your whole deployment chain. For that to be in the 100 millisecond economy, you want to make sure that it goes from end to end, from the click on your React.js screen, gone into your Kafka, Mongo, and went out with some kind of advice reaction. If not, now,
while inside Kafka Mongo performs a set of calculations, right?
Right.
As well.
A set of, of course, you've got the little service that does the magic. Let's say it's your AI deployment, it's your models. And just one thing about our industry. In a bank, in a transaction, you go in, you do your transaction, hopefully it's fast, you leave, that's it. But in gaming, there are hundreds of transactions, clicks, you have the side bets, you have the game itself, you may interact with the dealer if you're live there. So it is a very unique environment, not found in any other industries, and correct me if I'm wrong. So just to put the challenges mapped out for our discussion.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I have some points, but I'd like to bring them forward. Johan, you have any take on this?
Yeah, of course. You started by saying know your customer is the first commandment, obviously, of any company, and especially of gaming companies. Gaming companies are a mix of marketing and technology, and obviously knowing your customer is a super important thing. It's the prime thing, actually. Now, through time, we are moving from before. Initially, we had no data. Then we started moving data. We started storing lots of data. Now we're moving into applying AI to data and moving into real time. Now, even storing data and getting insights every day is already a challenge. And taking this to real time is a further challenge, but it is actually doable. There was one key thing when you asked me to be on this panel. I found a survey from Salesforce, which is one of the most popular CRMs out there, and it says that in 2020 the top challenge of marketeers is actually of real-time engagement. So what we're discussing here is not something futuristic. It's not something. It is the biggest challenge that they have right now. And it also says that 84% of the marketers are actually using AI already. So we're in good shape there. However, there is a lot to do until we arrive to mixing the real time and the AI together. We're slowly getting there, but the amount of data points, you mentioned data points. This report mentioned that companies have a mean of 16 data points, and when I say data points, it could be the CRM, it could be from emails, it could be from their ticketing systems, from their websites and the analytics. So it goes on and on and on. Their chatbot. So there is a lot of data. But I think with technology, step by step, we are really getting there.
I mean, there's a couple of things really interesting that you mentioned this. One, I want to unpack AI as we go through this conversation, because so far, purposefully, I haven't brought AI into it because real-time engagement does have layers. And AI is particularly where we're headed and what we must address. It's one of the, did I get you right? From a Salesforce survey, you've collected that the median number of data points is 16, 16?
16, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the gaming industry, we haven't scratched the surface with 16 data points, right? So that's how uniquely positioned we are. I want to roll back just one step and bring around the question to the three of you, exactly oriented over data and domain understanding. So when we look at the data architecture, before we go into hardware, whether we use Kafka, whether we use RAM databases, which is something I would really like you to give me your input on, the domain understanding and the domain knowledge of the operators and the marketing users themselves. I mean, I've mentioned the user journey, and Gege continued on that topic. If we take a look at the customer journey over time, the transactions, the deposits, withdrawals, the bet sizes, the balances, the behavioral patterns of bet to balance ratios. I'm going to not even go into marketing and customer engagement from the perspective of upsell. I'm going to look at it from the perspective of regulatory requirements as they stand today. And if we have a customer who has built a certain pattern of behavior over time, over 3, 5, 6, 9 months of lifetime, deposit size, pay-in size, withdrawal size, the amount of bets, the size of bets, the nature of the games they play. Right now we're at a stage where we are required to recognize deviation from that pattern in order to prevent problem gambling. And we are required to do that in real time. In fact, as an owner of a casino, as an operator, ex-operator of a casino, I can tell you that that demand has stemmed to a point where we have fraudulent customers knowing such real-time expectation on us that they change and modify their behavior, spend a lot, immediately go on chat and go, I want my money back, you haven't caught me on time, right? So when we look at data points in specific, I would like your opinion on 2 points. One, how do you approach the correct aggregation process, right? How do you educate your customers, or if you take an operator hat on, how would you educate your team what to look out for and how to recognize, you know, there's that adage, you don't know what you don't know, how to recognize what they can extract from the basic data set. That's one. And two, when we are talking about real time, we are talking about two things in particular. If we are aggregating historic data, then technologically speaking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, going back a transaction trail, especially aggregated transaction trail across all the customers you have on your platform, going back 6 months, I mean, that's a call that's going to come back in, let's continue this conversation tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. So the necessity for correct aggregation paired with the event-driven design. So today we are event-driven. We need to react in real time. So where do you draw that balance? Where do you draw that separation? And how do you merge the two, right? Both from the hardware perspective, what you use, RAM databases or so on, and from the software perspective. I hope I made myself clear, and I'd like to hear your take.
I think it's.
Let me jump in this time and pick up on your question, and not to sound too marketing. I think we're moving from the CRM reactive era to the AI proactive era, because that's what you said. You want us to react right now and not do a post-mortem based on the historical things, because anomalies, and that's what we're looking for, are happening all the time. So that's the world that you're working. The second thing, unpacking AI, which is a great term, and I'm going to use that in the future, is first thing that data scientists know is that most of it not invested in the algorithm. It's not even invested in your mathematics. It's invested in massaging your data. Because if you don't know what kind of data, and I'll be more specific in a second, then the machine doesn't care. So we invest 70% of our time articulating the data, specifically building what we call feature vectors. What are feature vectors? These are the 16 points that Johan mentioned, but we don't use 16, we use 1600. That's the size of a feature vector that we usually try to run in a model. And you're asking me a good question, Igor. How do you know? Well, the frank answer is we don't. So there's a lot of trial and error until you get to the pattern that you're looking. And I'll talk a little bit later. I have a sample of RG, but each case is different. So you are running multiple models. That means you might have a model for RG. You might have a model or several models for fraud. You might have a model for AML, which is a totally different challenge. So the data people are very much important here, and they are doing a lot of non-glaring work.
You haven't even touched marketing there. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, and I'm not into marketing.
There's a whole
I'm trying to build
the
data structure. So I laid out the foundation by saying we invest a lot of time in feature vectors, and I let my other panelists complete the picture. And how do we actually run that pipeline? Thank you.
I think we need to be thinking about moving from an event-driven type of strategy, which is reactive in nature, to an event-triggered, which is more predictive in nature. I think the environment which we're building today is one which is increasingly predictive, Igor. And I'd say that even when we have a defined scope and we're using very simple linear regression, our predictive abilities are already significantly accurate, especially in areas where you have very linear processes. So I think you are correct in explaining that the iGaming industry is so particular and so complex with so many layers. However, a lot of the processes which occur in gaming are linear in nature, which create the right model, the right opportunity for us to predict outcomes. But I think another interesting point for us to explore is this idea that generally a lot of the AI models that we look at create some form of classified data, right, from existing data silos. And we use that then to create the predictive model. I think we are going to be moving very rapidly into an environment whereby we need to start data enrichment exercises from blending in data from external third-party sources to be able to better inform us of the outcomes of our models. And if you allow me, Igor, I'll give an example which is pertinent to these, COVID days that we are going through. So we're a London-based organization, and we're looking very closely at how the British government was looking at reopening the economy. And they created a predictive model to try and study the impact that weather conditions, external third-party data source, right? Weather conditions would have on the reopening of pubs in central London and the impact on the tax computation. Because any pub owner is going to say, is it worth me opening? Am I going to make enough money based on the taxes and the rent which I need to pay? And the weather is a key determinant. So this is just one very simple example which shows that the models of data within gaming are linear, but could become enriched through the infusion of third-party data, which will allow us to be much better at RG requirements or particular predictions, which help the growth of the operator's business.
Very good. Very good. I couldn't agree with you more. Johan?
Yeah. Igor, actually, I don't 100% agree with you that hardware and technology is our biggest challenge at the moment. The amount of technological power that we have right now is nowhere near what we had till a few years ago, and to achieve real-time AI-enhanced customer experience, I think we have much bigger challenges than the hardware. But I'll give you a bit of insight about hardware too. So hardware is still a very important component which we shouldn't forget about.
I mean,
now,
just to clarify, it's not necessarily a challenge, but I do understand the need to segregate the type of data that we're serving, right? There is a need between real-time segregation, event-driven segregation of data versus aggregated historic data points, because it's the blend of the two. The trends of the past versus the current behavioral patterns that give us the insight, I believe, in order to react onto a customer. So rather than a challenge, what more specifically I'm honing at is how do you structure that? Historic aggregations, where do you store them? How do you store them versus real-time response and engagement? And is a single database okay for that? You know, is it SQL? Can SQL cut it?
I think the biggest challenge, and I'm just following on what Johan said, is right. We have an abundance of technology and hardware, and now we've just moved from one problem to the other side. Because if you want to maintain real time, Igor, you're going to fall in. Do you want to ask me something?
I want to allow Johan to finish because I've interrupted
him.
Oh,
sorry. My bad. I thought he was trying to support his argument.
Yeah, so just to go quickly answering your question, Igor. You mentioned, I think, SQL Server now. So in storing data, there is not just one level. So it's not just having a structured or unstructured data store and you store all your data there. There are levels of data. So a lot of data is aggregated in, for example, what they use the name data lake, for example, as a lower level. From there are data warehouses which are built from the data lakes. From the data warehouse, you said segregating. There are data marts that are built from the data warehouse. And this can keep also going depending on a specific.
I think I understand, and I want to see whether Gege and David agree on this. I believe what the information we're extracting from here is effectively creating data pools, data aggregation pools relevant to the topic at hand. So we're not talking about one data lake. We're streamlining and we're aggregating and we're actually moving into relevant topics, right? Similar data points that we could be looking at, and that's where we pull from.
And another point is between on-prem and the cloud. Nowadays, all the providers, Microsoft with Azure, Google with their Google Cloud, Amazon, IBM, they all have their cloud, and the cloud also have a lot of readily available machine learning models already. So it depends how big your operation is, but you could also move part or all of your processing, not just having hardware, whatever, at a Yeah, go ahead.
Because I know that we have a few minutes left, and I want to tap into the machine learning, because we've been circling around it. We haven't actually honed in on it yet. I know that David has something to say about the learning mechanisms. And I want to take Gege's points on unpacking AI. You know, my actual question is, where does AI become an I? Yeah, where does it become an intelligence rather than a simple rule engine? Yeah. So David, if you could take a minute or two, and Gege respectively,
Sure.
I think we can wrap up the chat.
Sure. So for the audience, and just moving on from the thread that Johan started, my first slide is just tell the audience, if you want to know something about artificial intelligence or machine learning, there's basically two types that you need to know of. The left one is supervised learning, and the other one is unsupervised learning. Supervised learning means that you take an algorithm like SVM and you feed it with trainable data. That means data that has been tagged. For example, I would show it a few deposit and withdrawals, and this is typical to a compulsive player. I have 1 million of those. I teach the machine, this is a compulsive player. Whatever is not similar is non-compulsive. So you get two planes. You get two planes. You get one plane, compulsive player. The other plane, non-compulsive player. That is simplifying supervised. The issue is, the challenge, Igor, is we don't have all that tag data. We don't have all that tag data ready for us to feed the machine. So what do? We want to use unsupervised learning, which is a clustering kind of algorithm that will put the groups of players in groups by itself. I didn't tell it anything. It's trainable about, it's looking for something that the machine doesn't know what it's looking for.
How do you validate the correctness of data? Surely there's a supervising layer.
Right. So the supervising layer for the unsupervised learning is the human. We look at the groups created or the topics created by the machine, and we say, oh, this sounds like a guy who's going to kill herself. And let me show you slide number 2, if they can put it out. This is an actual chat from a live dealer that we picked in real time. And what does he say? My girlfriend has just left me because I lost all my money to the casino. Now, this is, upon regulation, something that has to be alerted immediately, and not 30 days later when it's post-mortem, not only for the incident, but the guy might have killed himself, right? Yeah. So this is the type of, specifically, we use an algorithm here. One of them is called LDA, Latent Direct Allocation, that is an unsupervised topic detection. So if you have that in your funnel, which Gege will probably talk about, this is an actual case, how you use it and find a I. What is I? The insight that you're looking for, saying, hey, you better watch this guy. Everything might be okay. He might be joking, but it's definitely a red flag.
Gege,
right?
You had something
let me unpack the I in AI, right? Well, I'll start off by saying that I think machines today and the capabilities we have are becoming less artificial and far more intelligent, right? So in other words, the systems we build rely less on bottom-up big data and more on top-down reasoning. It closely resembles the way we humans approach problem solving and tasks. So the usefulness of AI is growing because it doesn't remain related to the very narrow domain, but becomes more involved in decision support, if you wish. And I think the eye of AI is particularly relevant over here because we're seeing our tools become suitable in scenarios in the gaming industry, which would have been totally unimaginable just a few months ago. Yes, I agree that the starting pool needs to be historical data, but it doesn't need to be enormous. With this reversion of the pyramid, if you wish, from bottom-up to top-down reasoning, our AI tools can give value even if you have limited data sets to feed it. I think a perfect example of this is what Google have been doing in their whole, AlphaGo Zero and AlphaZero models, whereby what used to take them months for training is done in a few hours, simply based on the different approach which we have to the learning process. So we should, in my view, not overemphasize the necessity of hardware constraints or data constraints, because the innovation trajectory which we are on is seeing far more huge capabilities that we have in intelligence provision. And we've had some excellent results with gaming organizations which had very little historical data for us to go by. Yes, of course, it's an advantage when you have a vendor which has existing data sets from other operators, from other industries, which become applicable, let's say language models or language understanding models. But it still means that our capabilities are allowing us to fulfill far more business needs than a few months ago without large data sets. And that is where the eye of AI becomes intelligent.
That's a fantastic answer. That's something I was looking for. Personally, the concept of not teaching it, I find that so adverse. I just, as a person that's been in the industry, I have a need to, like go, this is how you do things. So it'll be incredibly interesting to see what the machine pool, what the machine can make sense out of a pool of unfiltered data, right? What kind of dynamic patterns, dynamic segments, behavioral patterns, because even the product, I always said casino manager's mind or a sportsbook manager's mind is conditioned with the fact that we sit inside our domain knowledge bubble, right? Our perspective is from inside out, right? We don't actually have the perspective of the player outside in. So it's an incredibly interesting aspect to take a look at what the machine can learn and extract from just unfiltered pool of information. We're closing on. We've run out of time. I want to thank you for your time. I do hold on for the next chat. Talking about processing power, we're actually going to chat about neuromorphic computing, new kind of chip, following the neurons, the neuron pattern. Guys, thank you very much. This was very enjoyable for me. I hope you had a good time here. Yeah.
Thank you, Igor.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Igor.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.